Hi everyone, we are live here with Chris Bonnello from Autistic Not Weird. So thanks to everyone who could join us for this live stream, and also welcome everyone who's watching this as a replay. So many of you may know Chris from his Autistic Not Weird blog and some YouTube videos and the Underdog Series and various other things that we'll be chatting about today. And most importantly, for the purpose of today, Chris is one of the speakers at the upcoming Autism from the Inside online summit. So today is all about, it's a meet the speaker event to get to know Chris a little bit in the lead up to that event. So thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks for having me again.
Yep. So we can basically chat about whatever we want. I know you're into chess and Rubik's Cubes at the moment.
Yeah, well, used to play competitive chess, but that's basically being supplanted by, or I say competitive Rubik's Cube solving. I'm not suggesting that to win anything or that I'm even particularly good by cubing standards, but I'm good by regular person standards. But, well, for those curious, this is what it looks like when you solve one. So give me a second. There you go.
Ta-da! Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. I
I
average
just love
around,
watching.
excuse me, average just around under 20 seconds, but the people who win prizes tend to average under 8 seconds.
I mean, 20 seconds is phenomenal, really. But there's a big difference between 20 seconds and 8 seconds.
Well, yeah, things when you first start learning, in a month you could go from averaging 1 minute 20 to averaging 1 minute, and well, 20 seconds off. That's great, but the fewer seconds you have, the harder it is to shave them off.
I mean, the time is fantastic, but what I find really phenomenal is to just watch how accurate the rotations are. It's almost like the colors just switch, and then they're in a new rotation and it's perfectly straight. I think the limiting factor for me in the Rubik's Cube is that it's never quite straight for the next one, and I guess you get better at that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm beginning to forget what it used to be like for me to watch people who could solve Rubik's cubes before I could solve them myself. So whenever I see someone who doesn't know how to solve one, seeing me performing what they pretty much see to be complete magic with all these switching colors around. Once you know how it works, I imagine it's kind of like watching, don't know, watching a piece of machinery works. If you're not a mechanic or an engineer or have any expertise about it, you think, wow, this is brilliant and fascinating. I have no idea how it works. But if you do have expertise in that area, it's, oh, yeah, that's doing that. That's literally what it's there for, and so on.
So, what kind of brain do you need to be a Rubik's cuber?
Yes, well, first off, I do have a mathematics degree, but you do not need to know anything about maths. Um, Really? Oh, yeah, that's the stereotype that only the geeks and the nerds and the math people, or even the geniuses, they're the only people who can solve a cube. That's rubbish. Um, Solving Rubik's cubes is basically having half decent memory, being half good at pattern spotting, and the rest of it's practice. Uh, about once a month or some at Rubik's cubes tournaments with lots of very, very fast Rubik's Cube solvers who, as far as I'm aware, don't tend to be that particularly keen on maths. And I know that a lot of people watching this may be wondering, yes, a disproportional amount of people there are autistic, but it's not like the 100% autistic dominance that you might think it is. It's really just people who have been really keen and really enthusiastic about solving Rubik's cubes, and Yeah, like I said, that's why a disproportional amount of people there will be autistic, but it's not everyone.
Yeah, I think one of the things that would be a limiting factor for me is I have a really poor visual memory. So just remembering where things are in space is just not a strength. So that's kind of the core of what you're actually doing there.
Yeah.
Is there a type of memory that you find particularly difficult?
So I have to admit, I didn't hear what you said because I've got the YouTube window open at the same time, and it started making noise at me, and then I got distracted by reading the comments, and there are actually a couple of people I know here, like hello Juliet, and yeah, Juliet's actually one of the best cubers in the world. I think she's number
32.
one
Wow.
ranked female in the world. So yeah, great to have you watching as well. So sorry, what was that you said about memory?
Uh, I was saying that I know I have a really terrible visual memory. It's really slow, it's really forgetful. As soon as something's a little bit, as soon as it's gone from my sight, then I tend to start forgetting very, very quickly, which is not helpful for stuff like that. So
Mm.
I was wondering what type of if there's a type of memory that you find challenging.
Um, I wouldn't quite call it challenging, although the misconception people have is that I have a photographic memory. This is because, well, okay, a funny story. When I was 11, uh, mum and dad were, mum was driving me back from school at the end of the day, and this car just cut out in front of my mum, made a slam on the brakes, and she was rather annoyed by that. So the 11-year-old me asked, Mum, do you want me to memorise his number plate so we can report him to the police? By the time my mum said, "No, don't worry, Chris, it's fine," it was already too late because I'd already memorised there was a white Volkswagen Trooper with two brown stripes down each side, and the registration plate was H476ACH. And then when I was 15, again, mum was driving me back home from school, and I was just randomly looking around, and my gaze landed on the number plate of the vehicle in front of me, H476ACH. Mum, that's him. But that's who. That's the guy who cut out in front of you 4 years ago when I was 11. And I think that might have been one of the big clues that my brain thought a bit differently to other
Hmm.
people. I just thought up to them that, well, most people remember stuff like that. Turns out they don't. Anyway, so when I talk to people about my autism influenced incredible memory, the misconception is that it's a photographic memory. Not necessarily. I describe it as more of a calculator memory. So Rubik's Cube being a very obviously visual thing, I can't speak for all cubers and I can't speak for all autistic cubers, but um, to me, if I see something like this, I know exactly which algorithm to do. So it just becomes muscle memory after that. It's,
Hmm.
oh, in order to switch these around, I do this thing here. So yeah,
Damn.
it's more of a calculator than a well, there are visual elements involved, but I don't think that that is. It's certainly not the deciding factor for me, but other cubers' experience may differ.
Yeah, and the what struck me about your story before is that the neurotypical brains seem to have a real challenge with the continuity. Just because it happened 4 years ago and you've forgotten it already, how would you know? They need a bit more prompting so that their brain's in the right spot at the right time to understand the information.
I agree. Oh yeah, and I'd actually also recommend this to people who have no idea how to solve Rubik's cube and have no intention of learning how to do it, just because it's the greatest fidget toy that humankind has ever invented. Really is
I
a
would
good one.
find it distracting, I think, because maybe because my brain is not particularly good at it, but I would be trying to solve something, like maybe not the whole cube, but how do I do this to this? and it would distract my brain from conversation. But you seem to be able to have a conversation and run the automatic muscle memory in the background.
It's funny because I would never have got away with this when I was a mainstream primary school teacher, but uh, when I worked in a school for autistic students, I used to casually mess around with a Rubik's Cube whilst teaching maths, whilst actually addressing the class and explaining various maths concepts. I used to, well, I tried not to solve it because that in itself is a distraction, but I used to just roll it around in my hands. And the reason I could do that, uh, and it was completely fine in this particular school, was because this school understood the autistic need to move and do things and fidget with things in order to focus. Me rolling this around in my hands helped me to focus on what I was saying. Of course, it is kind of a what people call a double-edged sword. There is the possibility that if wait, hold on. Sorry, wasn't I talking to you about maths?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can see
there is
how
the
that might.
possibility that, if you end up focusing on actually trying to solve it, excuse me, then it becomes the distraction rather than the thing that helps you to focus.
So what are some of the interesting things you've learned about yourself since discovering you're autistic?
Oh, well, bear in mind, I discovered I was autistic in 2009, so how was I in 2009? 24. So, yeah, what have I learned in the last, yeah, coming up to 13 years? So, well, I suppose the most important thing is that I'm not a failed version of a neurotypical,
Mm.
and all of those things are trying to do to trying to make me less autistic. They weren't fixing me; they were actually damaging me. And yeah, I often use the quote from Judy Garland, the Wizard of Oz actress, who once said, "It's better to be a first-rate version of yourself than a second-rate version of someone else."
Mm.
That has resonated quite strongly with me, and uh, it's quite, quite nice that having spent a large chunk of my 20s trying to be that other person purely for the sake of other people's approval. I mean, the concept of self-improvement wasn't even part of the discussion. It was the approval of other people, regardless of whether it was
Mm.
good for me or not. Having spent a chunk of my 20s doing that, being afraid of being authentic, now I'm in my 30s, and my authenticity is one of the things that's, well, dare I say, it makes me successful. The fact that when I deliver training or when I advocate, it is entirely the person who I am. Now, I'm aware that not every autistic person gets opportunities to do that. That is why I say how important it is that autistic people, well, humans in general, but disproportionately autistic people, need to find a place in the world where they can play to their strengths
Mm.
and find that part of the world where their actual authentic autistic being is exactly who they need to be.
So you've been a teacher in various settings. What are you up to at the moment?
Well, I left teaching forever for a second time a few months ago.
Yep.
The first time I left teaching forever was December 2014. Then it turned out that no, I hadn't left teaching forever, I just left mainstream teaching forever. I then kind of sleepwalked back into the teaching profession because I was doing external tuition for students outside of formal education. One contact led to another contact, one contact led to another contact, and then ended up doing work for a school, and then they hired me as a teacher. Anyway, Autism Not Weird has really taken, well, it's been taken off for the last 7 years, but this last year or so, things have changed in a very positive direction, doing speaking engagements all over the place and doing teacher training all over the place, do consultations. There's book sales of the Underdog series. But essentially, I had 4 jobs, all kind of falling under the banner of autism advocacy, and teaching was the 5th job. And it reached a point where, as much as I loved teaching, I basically had to choose one of my jobs to drop. Otherwise, my body was going to drop all of them for me. So
Yeah.
I left teaching and now I'm a self-employed autism advocate full-time by delivering training, speaking engagements, and thanks to Patreon supporters, getting actually getting a consistent wage for writing stuff for the internet, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's the consistency that is often the challenge with that. I mean, people often kind of romanticize working for yourself, but the way I think of it, if you have, it's a matter of how many employers you have. So when you work as an employee on a standard wage, you have one employer, and then if you're a consultant or something, you might have 10 employers or 100 employers. And if you work for yourself, with lots of different people, then you could easily have, thousands of employers
Mm,
that you all
yeah,
have to make happy.
yeah, which comes with its advantages and disadvantages. The fact that um, I'd say you have to be really careful what you say online. But honestly, ever since my teaching days, my attitude has always been don't say anything on the internet that you're not willing to be held accountable to. So
Mm.
I'm I'm pretty okay with that. Kind of always have been. But um, also, it's been quite a learning experience drawing boundaries for myself as an autism advocate. That um, because so much of it happens on Facebook, for example, sometimes I fall into the trap of uh, evening comes along, I'm going to say, okay, my working day is over, but then end up answering messages and doing Autistic Not Weird stuff. And I really have to catch myself in the act of doing that.
Mm.
And of course, during the working day, the other case can be true as well, where I tell myself that I'm doing Autistic Not Weird work when actually I'm just looking at like socializing with friends and things. So yeah, once you don't have a boss that you're accountable to other than yourself, you really need to make sure that you are actually being accountable to yourself, that you
Mm.
do have the self-discipline to make self-employment work,
So
and
the one of the
more than
challenge
anything else.
one of the
Sorry.
challenges with self discipline is it can take a lot of executive function. How have you gone with that?
Funny you should say that. That's just something I've been struggling with these last few days. So after this weekend, I was away, got back, loads of messages, and basically, I've had to look at ways of finding out how to answer lots of emails without getting completely overwhelmed, or more likely, um, looking at the long list of emails and thinking, "Oh, right, okay, that's it, I'm defeated." So
Mm.
one thing that to do is again going back to cubing. Answer an email, do 2 speed solves on a Rubik's cube. Answer an email, do 2 speed solves on a Rubik's cube, and keep going and keep going. And ironically, if someone were to walk into my office at some point while I'm answering the messages, there'd be a 50-50 chance that they'd just catch me solving Rubik's Cubes. But honestly, I get so much more work done because it's all about miniature rewards. And there's always that tiny, tiny chance that you might break your personal best, but you have to answer an email in order to get that opportunity.
Cool. It's a pretty nifty
Yesterday,
little strategy.
oh yeah, giving yourself tiny, tiny, tiny rewards is well, so far it's worked very well for me. But yesterday, I managed to get from 28 emails down to 9 before just it just wasn't working anymore. And at that point, I just had to admit to myself that you've basically run out of energy for the day now. Just
Mm.
just admit that the working day is over. Otherwise, you're going to be say working deep into the night, just doing stuff with a computer deep into the night without any of it being really productive, feeling guilty about not being productive enough, and then waking up the next day exhausted anyway.
Yeah. Do
Right.
you
I
have
can
any?
hear everything you're about to say. I'm just going to open the conservatory doors because uh, basically this conservatory has become a greenhouse and I'm really, really hot. Just going to open some doors. I can still hear you.
Okay. Okay. So I can still ask a question and you can still hear me?
Yeah. Well, I've already opened the doors now, so
Perfect. What I was going to say is, do you have any personal strategies to avoid burnout like that?
Hmm. Well, I'm not suggesting I'm an expert. I'm an expert in getting burnt out, but um, it's very much an ongoing process. I'm very much learning little things as I go along. But um, I think for me, a bunch of it is learn how to not feel guilty for not doing stuff. For
Mm.
example, yesterday when I worked out that, okay, I'm basically out of energy for the day, I did still feel that pang of guilt for having those 9 unanswered emails, which I told myself I'd do. But you gotta be pragmatic and think there is a limit as to how much I can do today. And you know what? I don't have to feel guilty about that.
Mm.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably more important than anything I can say about how to be more productive. Or at the very least, that should be the underlying philosophy before you try to be more productive. Before you try reducing those 9 emails to 0, remember that you don't have to.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about autistic burnout, and a lot of the reason for that, well, a lot of the time, is because we push ourselves to that level. I know I do, at least.
Hmm. Yep, it's it's an expectation that it actually took me a while to realise that. As Patreon support actually made me realise there was a couple of years ago, one day where I think I apologised to the Patreon supporters group for not being able to post as often that week or answer messages as quickly that
Yeah,
week.
yeah, yeah.
Their response, it wasn't so much that's okay, Chris, take all the time you need, which would have been good. It was, Chris, we're not expecting you to be a complete machine. You are placing these these standards on yourself that the rest of us simply don't have of you.
Mm.
We're gonna like you either way. You don't have to half kill yourself, just burning yourself out to appease people who will just appreciate you anyway. So
Mm.
yeah, I think a lot of the time, especially if you're autistic and you're used to everyone else's standards being imposed on you, you end up imposing standards on yourself, thinking that it's what the rest of the world wants you to do.
Mm. Yeah, and a constant desire to sort of prove yourself and do better and meet
Oh
that
yes.
external standard.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's I know I personally find that is one of the reasons I appreciate my Patreon community the most is because they can remind me of really basic things like that. When the world feels really hostile, there's a group of people who have, you know, committed themselves to being a positive influence and supporting you.
Mm. Yeah, the Patreon supporters group I've got is often call it the friendliest place I've ever seen on the internet. And honestly, I was quite fortunate in my teenage years, growing up in very friendly, creative communities. But honestly, it's wonderful. I think one thing that it has to its advantage that is that everyone in that group has the common ground of being the type of person who would support an autistic advocate.
Hmm.
So right from there, it's yeah, you got the advantage of everyone in there being a supportive person, and they also directly fund my therapy as well, which is great.
Yeah, that's always good. So, interesting question. Feel free to answer this or deflect it if it's too
Uh-huh.
weird. But how has your increasing fame affected you?
Same. Well, I'm not entirely sure it has, to be honest. I think the my journey as an autistic advocate has changed me as a person, but I think it would have happened whether it had 16,000 or 160,000 or 1.6 million followers. I think it's I think there is an element of fear in there that if it becomes too successful, will that change me as a person, well, in a negative way? And
Hmm.
I think it's one of those healthy fears, which is actually good to have. But in terms of how is it? Oh no, just this last weekend I was at a Rubik's Cube tournament, and 4 different people came up to me and said, "Hey, you're the guy from Autistic Not Weird," and only 2 of them actually knew I'd even be there. So,
Yep.
so there's that. But uh, I don't know. I think the main thing that has changed about me during the Autistic Not Weird journey is that I'm actually confident enough to say and know and acknowledge that I am good at stuff. It's not so
Mm.
much, well, I'm kind of good at this, but don't worry, I'm terrible at a bunch of other things. It's like desperately trying not to show off. But it's reaching a point of, well, actually, I know that I am good at things, and it's not showing off to acknowledge that you are good at things. That can't remember the exact verse, but I think there's something in the Bible about looking at your strengths with sober judgments, and that's something that's stuck with me. The fact that you can acknowledge and understand the truth that you are good at something without it being some kind of toxic trait or something. Besides, if you willingly stop yourself from recognizing what you're good at, you end up missing opportunities to do the things that you're good at, and those things might actually be helpful to other people.
Mm. I mean, I don't know about you, but I had a lot of experiences growing up where if I was too good at something, then I would have lots of negative social consequences. So I know I definitely hid a lot of my talents, trying not to get too much attention in that way.
Yeah, there's for some reason, you just reminded me of the students that I just finished working with. One of the slang terms that's going around schools right now is a try hard. And if you're a try hard, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's someone who actually puts effort into something. And I'm stood there like, wait, that's a negative thing?
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, slang words change and cultures change, but humans just stay the same.
Yeah, especially kids. I find that if whenever I'm back in a school environment, it feels oddly, awkwardly familiar, as if nothing has changed in 20 years.
Yeah, that's the thing. Uh, we talk about how advanced we are as a species these days. Well, no, we're not. As people, we're precisely the same as we were 6,000 years ago. We know more stuff now, but you had kind people back then, you had greedy people back then, just the same as you do now. You have nice people and horrible people back then, just as you do now. There's nothing that's really changed about human nature. And uh, occasionally, I volunteer on a children's camp with the German Methodist Church, and no matter where you go in the world, children are just always children, and
Mm.
humans in general are just always humans.
So we've got quite a few people on the live chat at the moment, and I'm
Oh yeah,
wondering
been meaning to read the comments.
if anyone has some questions that they would like, or a topic that they would like us to look at. Because what you said before, Chris, really struck me that it shouldn't take ridiculous success to internalize the message that I'm actually good at stuff and I'm allowed to be good at stuff. Like how fantastic would it be if we could just
Yeah.
have that for every person?
Yeah, exactly. The fact that you shouldn't need the approval of tens of thousands of followers. Well, these days, more than 100,000 followers. Shouldn't need the approval of lots of people to acknowledge that it's actually, yeah, I'm good at this. But yeah, for me, it was very much. I Looking back, I knew I was good at stuff when I was a child, but I just didn't like talking about it because there were plenty of children at school who would talk non-stop about how good they are at everything, and obviously in my child's mind, that meant, oh well, if they're talking about how good they are at stuff, that must mean they are really good at stuff. I was a bit naive like that, but uh, yeah, I didn't want to become one of those people. But then as an adult, yeah, my backstory basically is I was an academic high flyer as a child. Primary school was completely fine because I may have been autistic, but I was academically clever and I didn't really have many sensory needs, which meant I was autistic and I totally got away with it. Of course, in secondary school, I did receive the standard program of bullying that they put in place for autistic students, but managed. It wasn't until I left school and tried to get a job that I suddenly realised how, wait, actually, I'm not good at this and not good at that. And those are the important things, because those are the reasons why you don't have a job. And that's the important thing, It doesn't really. It's all very well saying that, oh yeah, well, I'm a nice person on the inside, but if no one's paying you for stuff, then well, what does that matter? Obviously, deep sense of irony and sarcasm in what I just said, but it was basically how I was made to feel. We place so much value on what job someone has, or what they're doing with their lives, or what they have the opportunities to do with their lives, and
Well, I mean,
we
having just
often see it in terms of success and failure rather than whether the person is able to play to their strengths.
I mean, it makes sense why we put such a value to it, because you having a job and something to do, and the financial, stability and things like that is a huge part of life. And if there's one or two things that are getting in the way of that, then suddenly that's affecting everything.
Yeah, it's just a massive shame that it's had such a stranglehold on my self-esteem at the time, and my self-perception and my understanding of who I was. It's deeply tragic that yes, I needed a job and so on, and no, I wasn't. So I'm looking back to the most hurtful years of my life, and uh, trying to phrase things about it at the same time. But yeah, I I have been the person in his 20s who defined himself by his weaknesses. I'm now the guy in his 30s who defines himself by his strengths. Now, the brilliant thing is, my strengths and my weaknesses are almost precisely the same now as they were back in my 20s. The things I was good at in my 20s, I'm still good at now. The things I was terrible at in my 20s, I'm still terrible at now. The only exceptions are I can solve a Rubik's Cube these days. I only learned how to do that 3 years ago. And also, I know a lot more about comfort zones because of my professional work with vulnerable people. I've become a lot better at that than I was in my 20s. But
So we
it's strange how, and quite revealing actually, how the same set of strengths and weaknesses were seen so negatively by me in my 20s, but so positively by me in my 30s. And it is because the younger version of me wasn't getting the chance to do what he was good at, and in an environment where my weaknesses stood out rather than my strengths. And these days, it's the opposite.
So we have a question in the chat. What's an example of something that you weren't good at that prevented you from, or made it difficult to hold down a job?
Or hold down a job or get a job. It's, I'll go with both actually. Getting a job in the first place, well, the recruitment process. The fact that, well, these days it's kind of ironic, really. I give a lot of talks to employers about how to make the recruitment process more inclusive, and it's strange because I struggled so. But I got my first teaching job on the 13th interview. I was just too stubborn to quit. But it's weird how it's almost like I'm the last person in the world who should be giving advice to people on how to pass interviews by. But I often do that through lots of bitter experience. But I also talk to employers on how to make the recruitment process easier for people like me who would really be good at the job, but are not necessarily good at saying how good I am at the job. And after the first time I left teaching forever, my original plan was to become a school business manager, but in order to qualify for that, you need admin experience. So I went for an entry level filing job in a mental health clinic. And bear in mind, I was a former primary school teacher with a mathematics degree and a teaching degree, and it still took me 4 interviews to get a job that I could have got leaving school at the age of 16. That to me speaks volumes about the recruitment process. And what to tell employers is, imagine you're the head of a construction company. Would you rather give the job to someone who's really good at building houses, or to someone who is really, really good at talking about building houses? In fact, if there's nothing in the job interview that allows the candidate to demonstrate what they would actually do if they actually had the job, if there's no practical element to it, and if it's just questions and answers, then it's not really an interview. It's a spoken word beauty contest. And I was never very good at beauty contests in, well, any context, really.
We have another question. I'm not sure how we want to tackle it, but I'll read it verbatim. Why do we all seem to have such early trauma, whether diagnosed early or diagnosed later in life?
My personal answer, because the world is built with non-autistic people in mind. That's right from the early age. I was first assessed for autism at the age of 4. I didn't get it because it was 1989 and the movie Rain Man had only come out last year. So, the response my parents got was, no, don't be silly. Your son can't possibly be autistic. He can go to the toilet by himself. He can speak in words. He even understands what numbers are. In fact, every time you take him to playgroup, you're late by 10, 15 minutes because he insists on stopping at every lamppost and reading the numbers off the lamppost. How can he possibly be autistic? Yeah, I'm very grateful to Mum for letting me be 15 minutes late so I can read those numbers off, because, like I said, I got a maths degree 20 years later. So, anyway, where was I going with that? I was first assessed for autism at the age of 4 because my playgroup staff told my parents that, well, Christopher doesn't. I was Christopher back then. Christopher doesn't play and socialise with the other children. He just sits under the table and eats the Play-Doh. And, well, I don't remember much about playgroup. I do remember that my peers sucked, and there was a reason why I didn't have any interest in playing with them. But yeah, it was certainly, as you would naturally expect, it was a playgroup built for non-autistic children. It was built for, children in general, which generally doesn't include the autistic. And also, as a primary school teacher, there's what I often say to primary school teams about how the mainstream education system isn't really built with autistic people in mind. Primary school classrooms over here are generally filled with really, really bright colours, because all children like bright colours, and you make really full of really noisy playgrounds because all children love making loud noises. And we've got a surprise for you this afternoon, because all children love surprises, no exceptions. And yeah, I could say pretty much the same thing about the workplace as well, being designed for the non-autistic workforce. But the question was about early trauma, so I think it does come from that, the fact that and just to finish this point, you know how they often say that autism often feels like you're born on the wrong planet. That was never my experience. My experience was feeling like I'd absolutely been born on the right planet, but everyone else had invaded my planet and started telling me that I was interpreting my own planet wrong.
Oh yeah, subtle difference in framing that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, calling it wrong planet syndrome implies that the planet doesn't belong to us, that I don't have a rightful place here, when actually I do.
Yeah, you're like, where did all the aliens come from, and why don't?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard of this concept of there are 2 really interesting talks that are coming up at the Autism Explained online summit. One is on sensory trauma, which is very interesting, and the other one is on are microaggressions. And in a way, they're kind of linked because often sensory trauma is lots of little things every day. And microaggressions is basically, as it sounds, it's lots of small, difficult things, specifically that we encounter from other people. So it's like a little eye roll, or no one talking to you at lunchtime, or someone not saying hello when you walk into a room and you feeling like they didn't see you, or something like that. So it's like all of
Mm.
these really tiny things that you don't even notice that happen to you. Like if I walk into a room and no one says hello, well, what happened there? Did I do something wrong? Did you know what happened there? Whereas actually it's a microaggression, and it has an impact. So when we're talking about things like early trauma, all of those emotional things really add up to your sense of self and do I belong in this school, for example.
Oh yeah. Mm. Yeah, very much so. And yeah, that's very early installed feeling of I'm not good enough for everyone here, am I? So how do I become good enough for people? What do I need to do to appease them? And that's where masking comes from. It's where the inauthenticity that we're often forced to have comes from. It's where our habit of placing other people's needs above our own comes from.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic that you can either be terrible at masking, which comes with its own problems, or you can be really good at masking, which also comes with its own problems.
Yeah. Now you mention it. When I mentioned earlier about trying to term myself as non-autistic as possible, it turns out that one of the reasons that failed was because I literally could not be normal if I tried. And believe
Yep.
me, I tried. I really tried. In fact, there was uh, some years ago, there was a speaker who kind of slipped through the net and ended up speaking at a National Autistic Society conference, and the NAS very quickly distanced themselves from this person. In fact, actually put out a tweet immediately after saying, "We do not agree with what this person is saying." But he said that. I mean, you hear this from uninformed people, but you wouldn't expect to hear it from someone with a doctorate and someone who works professionally with autistic people. But he was suggesting that underneath every autistic person is a neurotypical hoping to come out, or uh, and wow. First off, wow, how did you get this far through your career?
Mm.
Did you talk to any autistic people along the way? Did you? Well, no. Let me correct myself. Did you listen to any autistic people along the way?
Yeah,
And
good
yeah,
distinction. Yeah.
I my own life experience is a counter argument to that, because if there were a neurotypical person inside me, I absolutely would have found him by now.
Yeah, I mean, there was some pretty extreme views about what autism was back in the day. Like, it's a shell of a human being, and there is no one inside,
Uh,
and really extreme things like that. But all it takes is, like you said, actually listening to people, which
mm,
is thankfully happening a lot more. There's a lot more firsthand testimonies and firsthand lived experience being shared, which is nice to hear. So I can understand how someone would get through their whole academic career without actually listening to an autistic person 10 years ago. Whereas
mm.
today, hopefully those days are behind us. Well, for most of the world anyway.
Yeah, I often say that the tide is very much turning in the favour of autistic people. Like how 10, 15 years ago, having an autistic speaker at your autumn conference would have been a special treat. I mean, this is a pretty advanced thing. We've got someone who actually has autism. But these days, it's become not a special treat. It's an unacceptable thing. It's becoming seen as the equivalent of having a conference about women with all male speakers. If you don't
Yeah.
have an autistic speaker, or a disability conference without a disabled speaker, or any, well, think of any marginalised group, etc., etc. The point is made. But yeah, the tide is turning in favour of autistic people. But well, that's the thing with tides; they turn very slowly.
I also see a question about what do you think about schools' policy of being inclusive in mainstream classrooms, and how can schools make it work?
Okay, so in Britain, some time ago, excuse me, the government of the day came up with the concept of inclusion. So make sure that people who had learning difficulties, or people who are autistic, etc., people who were traditionally kept isolated away in special schools, at least had an opportunity to experience mainstream education. Now, unfortunately, because it was a government approach, what that meant was one day inclusion was the wrong thing for all children with special needs, and the next day it was the right thing for all children with special needs. I can probably see where I'm going with this, but it has to be on a case-by-case basis. There are some students for whom mainstream education is never going to work, and there are some for whom keeping them out of mainstream education would cost them, whether educationally, academically, or socially, and so on. So we can't afford to make blanket statements like that, and also we can't afford to make assumptions based on appearances either. If I talk to you about this one lad who I used to work with, almost entirely non-verbal, huge learning difficulties, you'd think, right, so you must be talking about one of these people. Well, not you, literally you, but one might think, so you're talking about one of these people who should never enter mainstream education. Well, actually, the lad I'm thinking about, he stayed in mainstream education until he was 11 years old, and it was absolutely perfect for him because he was in a particular specific school who A, knew what his needs were, B, could meet those needs, and C, loved him. He was utterly in the right kind of school for that. But there were other students who were in that same school who weren't in that school for very long because they're very quick to recognise that as much as we want to meet the needs of every student, this is not a student this student's needs will be better met at another school. So how do you make it work? Well, first off, you analyse pretty carefully whether it is the kind of thing that can work and should work. And if it is, then first thing, establish what their needs are. B, make sure you can meet their needs. And after that, well, no, not after that, it's throughout the whole process, love them. Actually, deeply care about the student, because they will be able to tell whether they're cared about in that school or not.
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges is that the "I'm sorry, but we can't meet your needs" line is too easy for a lot of mainstream schools to bring out of the back pocket. It's like, oh, this is too hard. Here, I'm sorry, we can't meet your needs. Find somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm reminded of something
without all of those things that you said should be before that.
Yeah, these well, you just remind me of it. It sounds unrelated, but it is directly related because the attitude that runs under it. There was this conference I was at once, and the speaker after me was speaking about employment and getting autistic and or disabled people into work, and he talked about the often used excuse, very similar to, oh, we can't meet this person's needs. It's, oh, we can't offer the accommodations, and usually the excuse is we don't have the funding to put those accommodations in place. And I'll forever remember this person saying, yeah, when people tell me that, my immediate answer is, okay, what are your costings? Because it almost never even occurs to us to ask, but about 90-ish% of the time, they won't even bother to do the costings. They'll just make the assumption about it. So, yeah, if school says, oh, we can't meet your students' needs, then, okay, back that up with something. Can you demonstrate why this person's needs are something that you're incapable of providing for?
Yeah, incapable is a very strong word. And there's
I would
there's
only
a
ever
big
use that against people who suspect
and
themselves of deserving. Like, oh, sorry, we can't meet the students' needs. Oh, right, so you're saying you're incapable?
yeah. And there's a big difference between choosing the best option out of two good options versus choosing the least bad option out of two terrible options. So
Yeah,
in one
kind of just
sense
about
we're
every
asking,
election, isn't it?
yeah, in one sense we're asking the wrong question. Like, what's the point of saying which one of these terrible options is the best? We should be saying, well, what can we do to make the options themselves better?
Mm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the former is this is what the system is, and it's staying that way. You either fit or you don't. The other one has some element of flexibility there, and when you're helping and building neurodivergent people, flexibility should be your middle name. Not literally, but yeah.
So I haven't seen any questions in the chat. We should wrap up soon, I think. So I'll just give
I
people
had no
another
idea it was
couple of,
this late. Wow, we've been going for 55 minutes. Does not feel like it.
yeah, already, yeah. So we should wrap up soon. And if there's any last minute questions in the chat, let us know. It wouldn't be an interview with Chris Bonnello if we didn't talk about underdogs at least a little bit.
Ah, I suspect that might be the case, so I've got them right here. Right, so what do you want us to do? Do you want us to just... Oh, awesome, high five.
Actually, number four as well.
Oh, yes,
This one. This
wow,
one
there's...
was your first one. It's actually really good. I was not sure what to get, not sure what to expect. I'm like, oh yeah, let's give it a go. It's actually really good.
Yeah, thank you. It's a book that has a special place in my heart, not just because it was the the first book ever published, but also it's a book with 150 autistic children and teenagers from 20 different countries around the world, including Australia, all telling the reader what I think about 5 of them live in Sydney actually. Um, what was I saying? Yeah, all telling the reader what they love most about life. So it's a shamelessly positive autism book, and yeah, it was wonderful to be in contact with so many people, make friends with so many new people and families, and for them to make friends with each other, which is just wonderful. The amount of friends that have been made through people reading each other's pages in that book, and on top of that, they're talking about why they're talking
It's
about.
basically
Go on.
yeah. No, that's all right. You keep going. I'm just like giving people
Talking about what
a sense of basically
about
there's
what they love
quotes
about
from
life,
so many different people.
and a lot of their answers. Well, actually, no. Technically, all their answers come from having an autistic brain, because it is 100% of what we think. But yeah, I thought it would be a nice tool to steamroll over some stereotypes about autistic children are unthinking, unloving, and so on, and all that rubbish. And also more than that, the amount of children who have read that book believing themselves to be, am I the only autistic person in the world?
Yeah, yeah.
But nope, it's not just me. That there are autistic people all around the world. And on top of that, here are all these awesome things about life. Now, there are only 70 copies left in existence. Well, okay, sorry, that's not strictly speaking true. The ones that I
Unsold
own still
copies.
exist. Unsold copy. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're in my cupboard upstairs, and I do occasionally sell a copy. But because we're running so low, there are now some thoughts about what are we going to do now? Are we going to make another like updated version of it or something? And so, yeah, that's something I'm going to be focusing on, hopefully fairly quickly. But yeah, that's what we love most about life. But
I couldn't find my favorite one. My favorite one is something about I really love lemons. They taste like elephants or something.
that fourth person in the book, his name's James.
Fourth person. Okay, fantastic.
Yes. Lots of people talk about James's answer. It is hilarious.
I love lemons because I like how sour they are. They taste like elephants. Perfect.
Yeah. One of my favourites is the lad from London who said, "I know I should say the love family most about life, but I want to be honest and say daydreaming." Because that's absolutely the answer that I would also have given at the age of 10. Right. So, you
So,
want to talk about underdogs? Or?
yes, and perhaps in the context of, is there a place I can get Autistic Not Weird merchandise?
Well, yeah, if you go on. I don't tend to. Let me just find the link. I don't tend to post it that much because it's on Redbubble, and Redbubble famously isn't very cheap, and I don't get much commission from. But if you really were to want an Autistic Not Weird shirt or a mug or hoodie or so on, go to autisticnotweird.com, hover over the tab that says Other Interesting Things, and then click the Autistic Not Weird shop on Redbubble. Actually, if you search Autistic Not Weird Redbubble, one of it just comes up then, but that's without actually posting the link. That's the easiest way to get to it. Autisticnotweird.com. Hover over
I am
other interesting
on it.
things. Click Autistic
It
Not Weird
is
on Redbubble.
on it. Found it in the chat. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I was
That's
basically just following your instructions as you said it, and perfect.
nice.
Sorry, I distracted you from Underdogs.
No, that's fine. It was not all distractions are bad. Even though I was taught as a child that it's not a good thing to get distracted, but sometimes, especially in cases where you're feeling anxious, distractions can be amazing. Anyway, so the Underdog series, we're 3 books in. The 4th and final one has just gone to the publisher, and the whole of Britain has been imprisoned in these giant walled cities, and there are only 13 people in the abandoned countryside fighting to free them against this army of 1 million-ish clone soldiers. So yeah, 13 against 1 million. Guess who wins? But out of those 13 people, 8 of them are teenagers who escaped an attack on their special school. So you've got autistic heroes and dyslexic heroes, and heroes with ADHD, Down syndrome, anxiety, PDA, and so on. And they're the ones fighting to free mainstream society. So there's these are teenagers with a wide range of neurodivergent strengths at the same time as you'd expect, growing up being made to believe that they're lesser because they go to a special school and society disapproves of them for that and so on. But as the blurb on the back says, after a lifetime of being defined by their weaknesses, the teenagers must learn how to play to their strengths and become the best they can be in a world that has never been on their side. And yeah, the Guardian. I think you have the Guardian in Australia, don't you?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah. The second book, Underdogs Tooth and Nail, came joint second in the British Guardian's Not the Booker Prize. And they actually gave it a positive review, which was something unexpected. They said Chris Bonnello writes his books with furious energy, which I think that's one hell of a compliment. Oh, and the best one was in the title of the review that said, Underdogs Tooth and Nail, admirably unusual, which some people say is a good description of me. But yeah, that's Underdogs. 3 books in, and the 4th and final one is it's in the hands of the publisher now.
I like admirably unusual. That's a really nice little subtitle.
In a different world, that could have been the name of my blog.
So we might leave it there, I think, and wrap up this conversation. So as I mentioned in the beginning, Chris is one of 30 speakers at this year's Autism from the Inside Online Summit. You can find a link to that in the description of this video. It's a free week-long event that you can tune in and watch. So grab your free ticket if you haven't already. And I haven't told anyone on the internet this yet, but we're also planning to run a concurrent social event and have like an open social space throughout that whole event. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, or you'd like to help us put that event on, send me an email at aspergersfromtheinside@gmail.com. I know I changed the name of the channel to Autism from the Inside, but it's harder to change an email address. So at the moment, I'm still got the email address of aspergersfromtheinside@gmail.com. It's really exciting. It's on a platform called GatherTown, where you've got this little avatar and you walk around and talk to people, and it's like a video game. And anyway, really fun. Chris and I are about to go check out a demo with the volunteer team. So I suck at saying goodbye, so I will just wave until we stop.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I still can't believe you managed to get 30 speakers. For, you do it every time, and it always astounds me. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And thank you for having me on here. And thank you to everyone who came to watch, and those who haven't watched it yet but will be watching the recorded version. It's been interesting, as it always is.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Now to wave.